to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me tonight, my colleague Clay Jones. Good to have you with us, Clay.
Good to be here.
And I guess the first thing, we'll start with an announcement that tomorrow night, Houston Normal will have its meeting at 7:30 in the West Gray Cafeteria on West Gray Street, just outside of downtown Houston. Now, I understand earlier this evening you took part in some politics.
Yes, I went over and seen John Culberson. He was having a town hall meeting, and he came across as trying to be Mr. Jeffersonian, only for states' rights. I asked him a question about medical marijuana, and the audience was so far right that was there shouted me down.
You know, that's something that's been disturbing me in terms of politics across the country for nearly a year now. And this is the idea that bad manners, yelling, and disrupting takes the place of intelligent discussions in public meetings. There's absolutely no point in going to a meeting if all you're going to do is scream and yell and make sure that nothing happens.
You know, it seemed to me it was more like a feel-good meeting.
Yeah.
He had his own choir there.
Yeah.
And the questions were, well, the Democrats are taxing us to death again. We need to be rolled back to where President Bush had us.
Well, you know, I think I can kind of agree with them that we need to roll back to a good, firm Republican tax system like we had under Eisenhower. Let's let those with the top income pay taxes at around 70 to 80%. Let's scale it down so that the normal wage earner might pay 15% or even 20%. And the bottom end, that's still above the poverty level, pays around 10%. That's the good Republican basis that we had under Eisenhower, and it seemed to work pretty good.
Well, the Republicans don't like it anymore. They don't want to pay inheritance tax, and that's coming back in January?
Yes.
And there was an uproar in there that taxes were paid on that money once. Why we should just be able to give it away to whoever we want and have no tax for that person.
Well, I don't want to get too far off the track.
Yeah,
here.
but that was the meeting. It was all about taxes, and they didn't want to hear anything about the drug policies that are going on.
Well, it does lead, though, to a major problem that this state has, and that, in fact, almost all states have, if not all of them, and one that dates back to the founding days of the Republic. And that is that our representational districts, both for the legislature and for Congress, are drawn up not to give the best representation for the people, but to give the best protection for the incumbent politicians and the majority party at the time of redistricting. We use the word, talking about districting, of gerrymandering. That's because that Mr. Gerry of Massachusetts, shortly after 1800, represented a district on the map that one political cartoonist thought looked like a salamander. Its shape was so weird that he named it a gerrymander. Things have not gotten any better since then. If we look at the state of Texas on congressional districts, the one that struck me when I looked at the map was the district now represented by Sheila Jackson Lee. If you pull up a map on the internet and look at it, her congressional district is shaped almost exactly like the capital letter Q with a slight slice through one side. One of the other largely Democratic districts looks like a gigantic skinny dumbbell with one lump in Austin, one lump in Houston, and a very, very, very skinny neck connecting them. Those districts were done strictly for partisan purposes. If we were to go to a totally nonpartisan, totally numerically based system of districting, so that each 10 years, an independent, nonpartisan, non-political commission, and I would say one based largely of geographers and computer scientists, demographers, because they're the ones that know how to deal with the numbers, were asked to come up with a district that first had to be exactly the same in terms of number of people, or within 0.5% or so. Second, had to have the shortest total distance in boundaries throughout the state, which makes all of them nice and compact and
Concise.
almost circular. Third, as near as possible, preserves and recognizes smaller geographic districts so that you don't split counties up unless you have to. If you split a county, you have to keep precincts together if you can, and so forth. Then I think if we did that, we would see dramatic changes in the representational actions of our representatives. And I think even further that I'd probably go one step more than that and say that each 10 years, all of the districts had to change in shape a little bit at least, so that everyone in office at that time would have to be running to at least a slightly different constituency. But we should start our districting process so that it's based from the viewpoint of the voters and protecting their interest, not done from the viewpoint of the politicians protecting their right to stay in office.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a radical proposal, but I think there's even good constitutional basis for it. The Constitution requires the federal government to ensure that the states have Republican form of government, which means fair representation. The Federal Voting Rights Act, which to some extent implements both the 15th Amendment and the Republican form of government clause, in effect enforces some of the ideas I proposed, but not nearly enough, and because it's based on the 15th Amendment, it's largely dependent upon racial grounds. I think that the Republican form of government clause would let this be done without limiting it strictly to racial issues. And believe me, if we changed redistricting so that it correctly represented the population of this state or any other state as it is today, not as it was 50 or even 100 years ago, we would get much more responsive and effective government. Now, one of the things here in Texas, and I think this particularly affects some of the marijuana issues that we deal with, is that if we take urban areas in Texas, like Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, we find that they are horribly underrepresented in terms of their voting power in Austin, whereas more rural areas are highly overrepresented in Austin. And let's just look at, for instance, legalizing marijuana. If we were to put legalizing marijuana up for vote, what do you think the outcomes would be in, say, Houston and Waco? Yet in the legislature, Waco would have
Oh,
strongly
Debbie Riddle.
disproportionate voting.
Right, because of Debbie Riddle.
Well, not just Debbie Riddle. The whole area around Waco has many, many, many more representatives than its population actually entitles it to.
Oh.
Whereas Houston and Dallas have really much less than we should have.
And let's remind you all, this is a call-in program. It is your program. Call in with your questions. We're here to answer them.
Right. And I allowed myself to get a little bit off the track here tonight. We'll see if we can't bring it back a little bit more to some of the drug-related issues. There's a question I have been asked a couple of times lately, and I'm still working on the answer to it, but it's one that maybe some of you can help with. And I have been saying that if we legalized drugs, it would put the drug cartels and the drug gangs out of business because it would take their money away from them. The question I have been asked is, where would they go? If they've been making $1 million a month and living the high life, are they just going to shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, I'm going to get a job washing cars somewhere?
With the money they got, they don't have to work.
Well, that's part of the answer. But the funny thing is, the more I look at it, the answer to it is yes.
Exactly.
Because if you go and look at the average street level drug dealer, and this has been the case ever since we're talking about selling beer on the streets in Chicago in the 1920s. The low-level dealer is usually a part-time dealer who's a user. And I know in Houston, my numbers are a few years out of date. It used to be that a user could get fronted an 8-ball, an eighth of an ounce of cocaine worth $130 to $150. He could cut that up into about 14 quarter-gram baggies. He could sell 10 of those for $20 a piece, make $200, pay off his front of $130. That would give him $70 to live on for the day and leave him with 4 baggies for his own use. And that's what most of the drug dealers were.
Yes.
Likewise, the next level up, the ones that really distribute it to all of the dealers around, or even those that drive the trucks full from Mexico to Houston, these are basically working stiffs doing a job without much income. And if you take the drugs away from them, exactly what they're going to do is go out and look for a job. Not very good jobs, but that's all they can do. The same thing in Mexico. The peon who's now growing marijuana on the plantation will go back to growing corn because he doesn't have any choice. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, this is Paul from Houston. I was wondering what kind of footprint are y'all leaving over this whole marijuana issue?
What kind of
and how far along are we to actually legalizing it here?
Okay. You've asked a very good question, and it's a hard question that we argue among ourselves about all of the time. About 15 years ago, when I first got into a lot of work with the drug laws and studying it, I said, there's no reason why marijuana won't be legal within 5 years. Now, right now, today, I'm more optimistic. I really think that once we get this November election out of the way, something strong will change in Washington within the next year. Whether it's decriminalization or whether it's a decision by Congress to recognize state laws on the issue, whether it's recognition nationwide of medical marijuana. I think something will happen federally within the next year.
You're more optimistic than me.
I think that it's going to be interesting to see. California is voting on a statewide proposal to legalize marijuana on a state level this November. Right now, those in favor of legalization seem to be holding a slight lead in the polls.
Like 56%.
But it's not clear really where it's going. Whether anything happens in the Texas legislature in January through May, I don't know. I know there are going to be some attempts, but something's in the air. Something I think is going to happen soon. You want to add anything before we take a break?
Well, I hope that you're right. I'm getting tired of this fighting for what I know is right.
Yeah. We'll take a break and come back and continue from here.
This is Dean Becker of the Drug Truth Network. I urge you to listen to our programs on KPFT Radio, that's 90.1 FM in Houston, and available on the net at drugtruth.net. And the reasons why: there is no truth, no justice, no logic, no scientific fact, no moral clarity, no reason whatsoever for this drug war to continue. And it's going to take your involvement, and I urge you to become part of that solution.
About 60+% of the marijuana use in this country is clearly in Anglo communities, in white communities. But if you look at the rate of arrest, you end up realizing that 10% of the people end up accounting for 35% of the rest. If you look at the prosecution, then we end up representing about 47% of those who get prosecuted. If you look at convictions, we end up being close to 60% of those who get convicted. If you look at those who end up being incarcerated, you end up being about 72%. So you go from being 10% of the population to being 72% of the people who are being incarcerated. I call it that there is a criminal industrial complex that has learned how to mine black gold.
Hi, I'm Ethan Nadelman, the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. You're watching Drugs, Crimes, and Politics. Hope you enjoy it.
He just spoke to...
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Do you want to add anything? I know particularly you keep up a lot with what's happening in California.
Well, California, there's a big no on Prop 19 organization coming out there. They're saying that it's going to disrupt everything. The no vote saying that it's going to take California and make them go to hell in a handbasket. I don't know. Everybody I've talked to out there, it seems in a positive light, more so than a negative light.
Yeah, I think, and this has been my observance from a long way away from California, but for about the last year, the national media has been struck by the idea that medical marijuana in California as such has kind of resulted in a de facto legalization.
Yes.
And all of the naysayers and alarmists have been running around saying, the sky's going to fall, the sky's going to fall, the sky's going to fall. But I also have to ask, from following the news fairly closely out of there, if the sky's falling, where are all of the pieces? Where are all of the marijuana-caused driving accidents? Where are all of the marijuana-crazed criminals that are out on the streets? Where are all of the high school kids getting into trouble because they're high all of the time? And it just hasn't happened. And I think the people out there realize this.
Right. I mean, let's face it, back in, what was it, 1976? When
Yeah.
the Schaefer Commission came out?
74, 72.
72.
Yeah.
President Nixon didn't like the report, and it was supposed to be the paper that would finally prove that marijuana was no good.
Yeah.
And they came around and did just the opposite. They
Right.
recommended it. And it's just catching fire. We have 14 states. You've got Arizona this year voting on recommendation.
Yes.
That's going to pass.
Yeah.
Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island are all looking at legalization.
Yes.
Outright legalization, tax and regulate.
There are about another 5 states that have some sort of medical marijuana bill in process in the legislature as well.
I believe
And
we have 12.
the interesting situation is in Iowa, where after a decision from the state Supreme Court, the State Board of Pharmacy said that marijuana has been incorrectly scheduled, that it really does have medical use, and therefore they have requested the legislature to reschedule marijuana, which would in effect make medical marijuana legal there. And that's one where there's really not much political room for the legislature to hide.
No, there isn't. I believe the same thing is happening in Washington State. They're reclassifying it.
Yeah, but part of the problem here is that the law in the 50 different states is so different and so widespread that it's hard to come up with any consensus over what's happening. Now, Maine has one of the stricter and more structured state medical marijuana laws. They've come up with a rather rigorous procedure for licensing a limited number of distributors across the state, and they're in the very last stages of approving the licenses for those distributorships, and they should start opening really any day now.
Right.
And the new medical marijuana law in the District of Columbia is slated to go into effect on January 1st. So there's a lot of change going on.
Yeah. You know, let's talk about President Obama. I believe that he said that there should be relief to medical marijuana patients when he was running for election.
Yeah.
I believe he also said that the federal government shouldn't go after dispensaries that are run and done by the state regulations.
He didn't say anything like dispensaries. He said it's that the Department of Justice, which includes the DEA, should not be prosecuting people who are acting in conformity with state medical marijuana laws. Now, the problem is, in California at least, no one knows what the hell the state law says. In other words, there are people that are, in effect, full-time marijuana growers making a living out of growing marijuana and selling it to cooperatives who distribute it to patients. There's nothing in the California statutes as such that makes any provision for a grower's level step in the distribution chain. The statute specifically says nonprofit organizations,
Right.
but how you interpret nonprofit organizations, especially if you're dealing with a non-incorporated farming operation where the guy is, in effect, getting enough money to feed himself. Is that profit making or not? So the problem is that the California state law is such a mishmash that DEA agents who are pretty much lifetime employees, and most of them drank the Kool-Aid a long time ago, find a lot of wiggle room, and they say we're only going after people who are operating outside of what the state allows. We're getting a whole lot more interesting situations in Colorado where the statutes, while still not good, are a little better written. They give much more direction to the local governments about what to do, more about what's allowed in the process of distributing. And the result there is a lot of case law is coming out of the Colorado courts, which is finding in favor of the distributors and the providers, and is providing a much clearer picture of what the state law really does allow. And as far as I know, so far there hasn't been any real problem with overzealous DEA agents in Colorado.
No, there hasn't.
Yeah. No. Now, the other...
They've shut down a couple of dispensaries, but...
It was the feds that shut them down or the state that did? I know the state has tried to close some, and those are under litigation, and in some cases the courts have ordered them to allow them to open back up again. And part of those have been local city laws that have tried to ban dispensaries within their city area, and apparently the state law does allow the cities and towns that much leeway. But this kind of what does the law mean is going to take years to work out, even if we change the law all the way around. Yeah. In Montana, we've got some strange situations opening up there where they wrote a little bitty dinky let there be medical marijuana law that didn't really say much about how it's done, and things have been happening like a busload of doctors has been going from town to town giving physical examinations on the spot to whoever shows up and passing out authorization cards by the stack. Now, whether or not this is legitimate practice of medicine, whether or not these are legitimate, a lot of people have their nose out of joint with the idea that doctors are on a traveling school bus. That's one where political issues are becoming a big deal in it. But yeah, there are lots of problems that the states are going to have to work out as they put their laws into effect.
I know. I'm going to hate to see the day that we have 50 states with 50 different sets of regulations concerning marijuana.
Well, it works fairly well with alcohol.
They're different, but they're the same.
No, they're not the same. For instance, there are still several states where the state is the only seller of alcohol.
Yes.
All sales are done through state-owned liquor sales. There are others that put specific rules that you can only have one retail liquor outlet for every so many population. There are differences in taxation. There are differences in what the hours for drinking, what allowed drinking in public places is. In the state of Texas, we allow local option down to the level of an incorporated town within part of one precinct within one county to decide whether or not they want to allow alcohol sales at all, whether that's going to be only beer and alcohol or also distilled spirits, whether that includes only package sales or includes by the drink sales, whether it can only be done in places that serve food or whether there can be bars. I mean, if you try to draw a map of the state of Texas with all of the different local liquor variations, I'm not sure you could manage to do it. But even with that kind of wide variety, the system manages more or less to get by.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take another break and then come back and see what else pops up.
All right.
Some brilliant entrepreneurs came up with the idea of blocking the endocannabinoids in our body to create a new diet drug. The theory being, if cannabis gives people the munchies, then blocking the endocannabinoids would make them lose their appetites. The drug they developed, Ramonabant, did indeed reduce appetite by blocking the endocannabinoid receptors. But data from clinical trials showed that Ramonabant users suffered depression, anxiety, insomnia, and aggressive impulses at twice the rate of subjects given a placebo.
Well, Sanofi-Aventis, the company that had developed and was marketing this agent, did not study people with a history of psychiatric illness or depression before they applied for approval. That was probably a mistake. The EMA did approve it, and the drug's been on the market in Europe for a year and a half by now. And I've sort of said if there was any real problem with this that was more than just theoretical, we would know. Well, it turns out we do know. And they've suggested now that the risk for this agent outweighs the benefit.
In one study, there were 5 suicides among Ramonabant users because, as they discovered, endocannabinoids are also mood regulators with the capacity to make us feel euphoric or, when blocked, depressed. Ramonabant was finally withdrawn from the market in 2008. Researchers at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Texas reported that mice on Ramonabant developed potentially cancerous polyps at a far higher rate than controls, confirming that endocannabinoids are not only mood regulators, but tumor regulators as well.
You're watching the Drug, Crime, and Politics show. I need less business. Help change the laws. Fewer people locked up for this foolishness will help all of us.
Welcome back to the second half of Drugs, Crime, and Politics. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. I'm with Clayton Jones. Clay, we started out the first half tonight with your railing about one of your favorite politicians.
Oh, yes.
Jefferson Culberson. I think he thinks of himself.
Yes.
But I'm wondering if we should start the second half by giving you a chance to rail about a California politician, Senator Feinstein.
Oh, Dianne Feinstein. Dianne Feinstein introduced into the Senate a bill on confectionaries and marijuana, saying that it is against the law to manufacture, sell, possess any type of confectionaries that have cannabis in it.
And what does she mean by confectionery?
Whether it's candy, cookie, any type that is added to anything to eat.
Okay, now let me ask you if you can explain why a medical marijuana patient would be concerned about whether his marijuana comes in the form of something to smoke or in a cookie or a brownie.
Right. Well, there's a lot of conditions that people have that they cannot smoke, or they have lung problems, they have COPD, and they have two or three alternatives to use it. One, to take it internally, and you can do that by eating it, or you can take it direct.
Can we take Dean's call and then
Sure.
come back to this later? Hello, Dean. Welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Hello, Buford. How are you and Clay?
Good, man.
Tonight.
Yeah, hey, there's a lot of news, as always. As I've been telling folks lately that business is good in reporting on the drug war, as you guys know. There's just so much going on. But I wanted to tell folks I was really quite proud last weekend. I had a former judge, she's now retired, out of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Maria Lucia Caram. And though she was very precise, precise with her words, because she doesn't speak that great of English, but a really great interview, just undercutting the fallacy that this drug war has any merit whatsoever. And then on the Cultural Baggage Show, I had Gretchen Burns-Bergman of Parents for Addiction Treatment and Healing, Randy Credico, who's running for Senate up in New York against Chuck Schumer, and then a report from Mary Jane Borden talking about the truth of these drug war facts, if you will, that the government touts. This coming week, I've got a couple of other great guests. I've got Russ Belville from Normal. He's going to be talking about the conference that's coming up in early September up in Portland, Oregon. We're going to hear from Clarence Walker. He's a journalist / private investigator, wrote a great article, and he's going to come in studio. I've got an interview I'm doing with Dominic Holden. He's based up in Seattle. He's a journalist, writes for a newspaper up there called The Stranger. He's talking about the paradox in the pot laws. And then I'm trying to get an associate of his, Mr. Brendan Kiley. And Buford, you're going to love this one. He wrote a piece about levamisole, its use in cutting cocaine. Okay. That is perhaps more expensive. In fact, it is more expensive than the usual, baby powder or whatever they might mix in. But it actually enhances the cocaine. So it's actually put in before they ship it from Colombia or certainly out of Mexico. And it's not something that's done by the gangs here. This is done by the cartels. Yeah. The insertion of levamisole, which is a cancer-causing agent, which tears down your immune system, which is causing deaths across America. And then one report said up to 70-something% of the cocaine in America is cut with levamisole. Yeah. So this drug war is a prime example of good intentions gone bad, is it not?
100 years ago, the cocaine in America was manufactured by Merck and was of the same high quality that their pharmaceuticals still are today.
And I remember hearing from you when I first got into drug reform that back before the Harrison Narcotics Act, that Bayer heroin sold on the grocer shelf next to Bayer aspirin at the very same price, and that then, as now, aspirin's still giving it a run for its money insofar as its toxicity and misuse.
Yeah. Dean, I wanted to ask you, you may not know anything about this, but several weeks ago, a medical marijuana patient from California was arrested in Brownwood. Brownwood up in Brown County, Texas.
Okay.
And thrown in the slammer there for possession of marijuana. And last I heard, the sheriff there was talking big and bad about throwing him in prison and no exceptions for druggies in Brown County, and bond was set outrageously high. I was just wondering if you had heard any follow-up on that or what had happened on
I haven't heard anything past that point in time. I did hear of the situation, and I'm appalled at the fact that we just live in the 18th century here, I think, in some regards in Texas, that we're afraid of witches and flowers and potions. Okay. I really think we have to take a look again at what exactly it is we're trying to do, and it's certainly not stopping the drugs or keeping the kids from it, or
it hasn't even stopped people from getting shot in Mexico.
28,000 now. I mean, it's a
Yeah, they had their WikiWix of Mexican government releasing information.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were saying that Juarez isn't 1,800 killed over there in the last 3 years. It's something like 2,700.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the bodies are still, a lot of them are buried. They throw them in mine shafts and.
Oh, they're finding them. Yes.
Kinds of crazy places. And Buford, I know you were kind of playing devil's advocate. I wanted to kind of respond to your thought about this situation with the touring bus of doctors up there, I think it was Montana.
Yeah.
And kind of writing recommendations willy-nilly. I personally think it's not something to be concerned about. Because, I mean, they talk about in California, if you've got a scrape on your elbow or a migraine, you can go in and get a recommendation. Well, the truth be told, if a person has a scrape on their elbow or a migraine, they can go into Walgreens and they can buy aspirin, which DEA Judge Francis L. Young said marijuana is safer than aspirin. I don't think we have anything to be worried about.
No, I don't either. I was trying to be very careful about how to describe that without falling into the trap of sounding like the people that were so appalled by the traveling doctors with their ready pens.
People are worried about nothing.
Yeah.
That is what the drug war is. It is a fear machine.
Yeah.
It exists on nothing but fear.
Yeah.
Fear of what may happen. I often compare it to that movie, The Minority Report,
Yeah.
where these detectives were seeing into the future and preventing murders and other crimes by being psychic and, I guess, tuned in electronically. But that's what these drug warriors think or pretend or at least say they're doing, is preventing future crimes, stopping people from becoming more addicted to harder drugs or whatever.
Yeah.
That somehow they're going to stop little Jane and Johnny from getting hands on it. But truth be told, they haven't done any of that, and they never will.
And right now, little Jenny and Johnny are taking mom's Vicodin or Oxycontin and ending up strung out on opioids. So,
And if God forbid they were to drink a couple of beers with it, they're killing themselves.
yeah,
And because we waste our government dollars, these drug ads that always talk about marijuana and the little dog talking to the spaceman.
yeah,
When the truth be told, we need to be telling these kids about the dangers of these drugs if they go mixing them and matching them and doing their farm parties, as they call them. But especially if they start mixing it with alcohol, they're asking for trouble or death.
okay. Thank you, Dean. And where can people find you on the radio and on the net?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity here, Buford and Clay. You can catch all our shows at drugtruth.net. If you're in Houston vicinity, you can listen on Sunday nights to our half-hour shows that begin at 6:30 p.m. on KPFT 90.1 FM. And again, this week we'll be having Russ Belville at 6:30, and we'll be having Mr. Clarence Walker at 7 p.m. and reports from Dominic Holden and Brendan Kiley out of Seattle.
Hey, Dean,
Yes,
the
sir.
judge that you had on your program Sunday, what did she say that the drug laws that we are enforcing in South America is doing to their countries down there?
To Brazil. Well, they have such a situation that they have thousands upon thousands of people killed in what they call the favelas, which are the barrios, the downtrodden neighborhoods. And there the kids have no hope whatsoever. Their hope is to get into a gang, to have a few years of, quote, fortune by being involved with the gang before they're killed in a shootout with either other gangs or with the police. And that's, again, we hear about the 28,000 in Mexico, but there's thousands dying there. In Jamaica, just a couple of months back, they had well over 100 people die in gun battles there over a drug baron, if you will. We give too much power, money, and influence to these criminals because of our fear of flowers and potions.
Yes.
We've got to grow up and get rid of our fear of witches. That's what's wrong with us.
Okay.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Keep it up.
Okay.
Dean's got it together.
Yeah. Now, Brazil's got a lot of problems with local consumption in its barrios, but also, surprisingly enough, Brazil has also become part of the cocaine pipelines out of the Andes.
Mm-hmm.
Only it's going through Brazil to Nigeria and then up into Europe. The Colombians are actually selling almost as much in Europe now as they are in this country, partially because the American market is saturated, and partially because they can sell it at much higher prices in Europe. But most of that is not going through Mexico. It's instead going through Brazil, Nigeria, and then to Europe. So,
There must be some good money in it.
well, we've repeated time and time again that the estimates are that just the money going to Mexico is about $30 billion a year, and that's profit above what they pay to the Colombians. And about half of that money is for marijuana. The other half is for predominantly cocaine, but a large extent methamphetamine, and to some extent heroin. But yeah, it's big money. If you look at the UN figures on international trade, the numbers go up and down every year a little bit, but always the international drug trade is one of the big 4 or 5 of international trade. It's right up there with petroleum, arms, drugs, and stolen art. Well above automobiles and clothing, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Aren't the Russians complaining to us about the heroin from Afghanistan getting into Russia? And
Yeah, but I don't know why they're complaining to us. I mean, it's coming straight across the border. Now, you know, we get hysterical about Afghanistan heroin. And Afghanistan produces a lot of opium. And let's leave it at the opium level before we refine it into heroin. That's not done much in Afghanistan. But something like 6% or less of the Afghanistan opium ends up in the United States. We forget that they're also supplying China, Russia, Iran, Iraq, most of Africa, India. So what we do or don't do in Afghanistan is pretty small potatoes. So let's take another break and see if I can get my voice working again. We'll see you in a minute or two.
Want me to run and get your glasses?
Hi, I'm Nadia Swaby with the Marijuana Policy Project. Welcome to Marijuana 2-Minute Truths. We've received lots of emails from viewers who want to know about the long-term health effects of marijuana, particularly what, if any, damage smoking marijuana causes to your lungs. Your lungs bring essential oxygen into your body, so of course hurting your lungs is a terrible idea. Did you know, for instance, that nearly 500,000 Americans die every year from tobacco-related lung disorders? If you've been paying attention, you probably did. But do you know how many people have ever died from marijuana-related cancer? 0. No one. Marijuana has never been shown to cause cancer in humans, and the largest, most definitive epidemiological studies have failed to find an association between marijuana use and lung cancer, or any other kind of cancer, typically linked with smoking cigarettes. In 2006, Dr. Donald Tashkin of UCLA published what is perhaps the most famous of the marijuana lung cancer studies. The study of 2,200 people in Los Angeles found that even heavy marijuana smokers were no more likely to develop lung cancer than non-users, in contrast with tobacco users whose risk increases the more they smoke. Interestingly, this study was funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Dr. Tashkin was later quoted in the Washington Post. We hypothesized that there would be a positive association between marijuana use and lung cancer, and that the association would be more positive with heavier use. What we found instead was no association at all, and even a suggestion of some protective effect. In fact, some scientific studies have shown a trend toward lower lung cancer rates among marijuana smokers than non-smokers, suggesting that marijuana's active components, cannabinoids, have anti-tumor properties. Take a look at these findings. Cannabinoids are selective anti-tumor compounds, as they can kill tumor cells without affecting their non-transformed counterparts. A strong and statistically significant anti-tumor effect was observed, in particular for a highly malignant human breast carcinoma cell line. Cannabidiol and cannabidiol-rich extract counteract tumor cell growth. This should not be taken to mean marijuana is good for you. No one is saying that. But how can marijuana be illegal when it has never been proven to have killed a single person through overdose or illness in 5,000 years of recorded history, while in the next hour, approximately 50 Americans will die from a tobacco-related illness? This has been your 2-Minute Truth. Marijuana has not been shown to cause lung cancer, but cannabinoids may help fight cancer. I'm Nadia Swaby with the Marijuana Policy Project. Don't forget to email us your questions. Send them to socialnetwork@mpp.org with the subject line Ask Nadia. Goodbye.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Clayton, we started the evening talking about your attempt to ask Senator, I guess we can call, or Congressman, I guess we can call him that, Culberson.
Yes.
And that his supporters there were a little bit rude to you.
Extremely.
I was just thinking that among our audience there ought to be enough people so that whenever Mr. Culberson has a public meeting of any kind, anywhere in the Houston area, there ought to be someone in the audience who could ask him a question about marijuana or medical marijuana. I think it would be nice if maybe over the booing and screaming of the crowd, we ask him the questions often enough that one night he might even get a chance to be allowed to answer them. And let me put out a plea to John Culberson's supporters who go to these meetings. These are serious questions. Your congressman deserves the opportunity to share with you and with us his viewpoints and thoughts on these serious issues, and that it would be to your best interest as well as his to give your congressman a polite opportunity to respond to the questions.
I agree. The more people that go there and ask the hard questions,
yeah,
the better it's going to be for us.
Well, are those hard questions?
They are for him.
Hello, caller, you're on the air. Hello?
You there? Call back.
But I think, you know, one of the things that has disturbed me over the years is that I know there are a lot of people in the state of Texas that are truly concerned about these issues. Yet there seems to be no public acknowledgement of it at all. It's time for people who care about these issues to start speaking up in public fora of all kinds. If any of your representatives hold a town meeting or a forum, ask the question. And I mean, you don't have to be belligerent about it. You don't even have to show which side you're on. Just ask them, what do you think about marijuana? Legalize it, medical marijuana, whatever. Just ask the questions. And if the question gets asked by someone at every meeting, then someone else in that meeting is going to start talking about it.
That's right.
And we'll see. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
This is a show with Clay on it, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I would just like to know why they say that marijuana is a stepping stone to other drugs when everybody I know that ventures off and does some other kind of drug, they get drunk first, and that makes them weak. How come they say that marijuana is a stepping stone? I don't know any pot smokers out there doing these other drugs.
Okay.
It's true.
Don't know how much of a history lesson you want. In 1937, when the head of the Bureau of Narcotics testified to Congress about the first marijuana law, he said, marijuana is not a gateway to other drugs. It is not. In 1951, when he came back and testified to Congress about the Boggs Bill, which led to the modern drug laws, he said, it's clearly proven that marijuana use is a gateway to using hard drugs. In 1972, the Schaefer Commission, in its report, Marijuana, a Misunderstanding, said it's clear marijuana is not a gateway to other drugs. In 1995, the National Institute of Medicine wrote a report and said marijuana is not a gateway to other drugs, but the illegality of marijuana is a stepping stone, because when marijuana is against the law, anyone wanting to buy marijuana has to associate with criminals and buy it from people who probably also sell cocaine, heroin, and whatever, so that it puts the people who buy marijuana in an environment where they're more likely to be tempted to use other drugs. That it's the illegality that's the stepping stone, not the marijuana itself.
You know, I find that I kind of disagree with that, because marijuana, it isn't a high like cocaine or heroin. It's more of a mellow.
Well, the thing is, from the medical side of it, it's true that virtually everyone who becomes a heroin user at one time or another had used marijuana. Of course, the numbers mean that over 90% of the marijuana users never use heroin. But when we look at it medically, the two key indicators of later use of hard drugs, including mainly heroin and cocaine, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, are the use of alcohol and tobacco before age 12. Yep. Those are the real indicators that someone's probably going to use hard drugs later, not marijuana. That's just part of the lies your government has been selling you. We're about to run out of time again. It seems like this hour always goes by before we run out of anything to talk about. And I think we still need to keep repeating our mantra from every show that it's your government, it's your laws, but they can only do what you want if you let them know what it is. It's up to you to tell your elected representatives what you want. The most effective way to do this is with a handwritten letter on real paper with a real postage stamp. If you can't do that, email, telephone call is fine. They all have home offices in their district, which is close to you. You can set up an appointment, go by and talk to them personally. And I know that the most dramatic effects that we've seen have been for elderly medical marijuana patients in wheelchairs to go to a representative's office, look him in the eye, and tell him why she needs her medicine. It's your law. It's up to you to make it work the way you want it. So keep working the good fight, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatories and
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. You end prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize all drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods, the most important thing that we could do, the single most important thing that we could do, is end the war on